So you telling me I can't record on my phone? Okay. So I know I can record.
Tá filmando, ó, ninguém tá armado aqui, eu tô filmando.
Quebrando a câmera de jornalista aqui, ó. Ó, olha a porrada na minha mão,
The right to record gives us an opportunity to preserve history, an opportunity to tell our stories and own our narratives, to fortify our truth, and to push back against false narratives that seek to undermine our collective strength as a people.
Es importante que todas las personas defendamos el derecho a grabar, que podamos apoyar a las comunidades, a los grupos, a periodistas, a organizaciones que están en donde están sucediendo las violaciones de derechos humanos, que están siendo nuestros ojos en las protestas, en las movilizaciones, que podamos defender el derecho a grabar de esas personas que están ahí documentando, registrando todas estas violaciones, todas estas atrocidades que están sucediendo, toda la violencia que proviene del Estado en estos escenarios, que podamos apoyarles.
على الرغم ان في دول كتير بتحاول تسن قوانين جديده بدواعي الخصوصيه، لكن الهدف الحقيقي منها بيكون محاوله الحد والسيطره على الحق في التصوير، لكن كمان الدول الاخرى اللي فيها قوانين ودساتير بتحفظ هذا الحق بنلاقي ان الواقع على الارض بيكون مختلف.
Que o direito de filmar não pode ser só o direito que está garantido na lei. Precisa ser um direito defendido pela população, precisa ser um direito defendido pelos movimentos sociais.
The right to record allows us to fortify the truth. At Witness, we are quite clear that the veracity of what we film is what takes precedence. This is what motivates us to keep protecting our freedom to film. When we talk about the right to record, we are referring to the right to take out a camera or cell phone to film the military, the police, or other law enforcement officials without fear of arrest, violence, or other retaliation.
Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Meghana Bahar. I am the manager of Witness's Global Digital Engagement Program. And welcome to this live huddle, Right to Record, Protest, Resist, Exist, a learning and sharing huddle by Witness in partnership with the Video for Change Network, longtime collaborators in the fight for using video for justice. I warmly welcome you, our guest speakers from V4C, Bethlehem, and Engage Media, and my fellow colleagues at Witness. Thank you all for your presence, your participation. I also welcome our online audiences from all regions of the world. We are happy that you are tuning in with us and hope that you'll stay with us till the end. On the eve of Human Rights Day, as we watch our timelines fill up with more videos of police violence against Indigenous people in Guatemala, against protesters calling for the resignation of their prime minister in Bangladesh, and uprisings against the killing of a Roma teenager in Greece, I think that we all agree, without the universal right to record, justice and accountability would be a distant dream. This live huddle runs parallel to Witness's ongoing global campaign that seeks to assert and affirm the right to record as a universal human right that should be protected. The right to record, as recognized by the United Nations, is linked inextricably to the freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, the right to access information, the right to publish, and indeed the right to life. We think this is a perfect moment to celebrate our partnerships, to spotlight our activisms, and the courage of community defenders who are facing direct crises in their home context. Our movements continue to crisscross, collide, converge, because we all move from the premise that our freedom to film, our right to record, helps us fortify the truth. This event, as well as our campaign overall, aims to shed light on how the ability to pick up a camera or smartphone to film human rights abuses has greatly affirmed the value in visual evidence. Documenters across the world have found great value in recording violations during protests and demonstrations, during the run-up to elections, in situations of war and conflict, in highlighting environmental degradation, harm to indigenous communities and Black lives, and many other abuses. I'm honored to be amongst you all, to be a part of this circle of truth tellers who have witnessed firsthand the value in being able to act on our freedom to film. I invite you all now to share with us and with everyone watching this video, your work, stories of triumph, your collective strategies and evolving praxis for documenting human rights violations in your different contexts. I move first to ask Demi Dangla from Video for Change to tell us a bit about the V4C network and why the right to record is crucial to the continuity of our movements. Over to you, Demi.
Thank you so much, Meghana. So hi, everyone. I am Demi from Manila, Philippines. I am happy to be here. So I am speaking on behalf of the Video for Change network. It is a consortium of organizations catalyzing the use of video for human rights, social justice, and environmental change. Founded at a meeting in 2012 in Indonesia, the network aims to maximize the collective learning, resources, and experiences of its members to build spaces where those seeking to use video as a tool for change. It strengthens collaboration so they can better respond to shared challenges and opportunities. So right now we have 11 active members from different parts of the world. And if you want to check out each members, you can visit our website, videoforchange.org. So I've been mentioning about Video for Change. So what exactly does it mean? So Video for Change refers to the use of video as an approach to support social movements, document rights violations, raise awareness, and share new knowledge on social or environmental issues, or otherwise contribute to social change. We have also developed an impact toolkit. So the Video for Change Impact Toolkit helps practitioners design for and evaluate social impact. It is a holistic approach that considers all activities and their capacity to create impact in the process of telling stories and creating an output, rather than focusing on the effect of a video product alone. So I'd also would like to share some specific examples and activities that our network members have been doing in the past couple of years. So one of our network members, Inform Action, for example, promotes citizen journalism among the people of Kenya to play an active role in the process of collecting, reporting, analyzing, and disseminating news and information. They conduct media trainings wherein they teach citizens on how to record usable images, video, and audio using their smartphones, and also how to most usefully and strategically share the recorded materials. Intimidation, threats, and confiscation of their phones are some of the fears expressed by participants when documenting abuses. Inform Action shares tips on safety and security to guide them during documentation. So since 2010, Inform Action has empowered hundreds of thousands of Kenyans in rural and marginalized areas, profiling the demands for change through innovative media and action. On the other hand, in India, Video Volunteers empowers marginalized communities through training citizens to become community correspondents and gain skills in producing videos and social media content also on their smartphones. So with the support of video volunteers, they publicize content widely and are promoted to revisit their videos later for an impact video to show the results of their campaigns. As of now, they have at least 300 community respondents exposing underreported stories from their communities. On the other hand, in Malaysia, Freedom Film Network supports filmmakers to create films that speak up against social and environmental injustices and screen their social issue films in various platforms. So they also provide social impact grants that can be used to empower communities and engage wider audiences. Recently, they held their Freedom Film Fest, wherein they screened stories from young indigenous women from Orang Asli villages in peninsular Malaysia and the impact of discriminatory citizen laws, among others. And then Engage Media, on the other hand, produced 8 films that highlight human rights stories in the digital age. They are called Tech Tales, and you can watch them on cinemata.org. So these films, they cover stories on online surveillance in India, Malaysia and Thailand, data privacy and online gender-based violence in Indonesia, massive disinformation campaigns in Myanmar and the Philippines, online freedom of expression in Cambodia and Malaysia, and digital sovereignty in the whole region. To give an example, in a narrative film from Myanmar, the filmmaker reflects on the disinformation being spread and the lack of information available to the people of Myanmar following the military coup. The military is using the internet blackout as well as disinformation strategies to spread propaganda and quickly consolidate its power grab. Through the filmmaker hopes to raise awareness on the need to fight disinformation and inspire resistance against state propaganda. So why uphold the right to record? The Video for Change network believes that people need to uphold the right to record because it gives the marginalized people and underrepresented groups the power to fight human rights abuses and social injustices and hold the powerful to account. These videos are evidence and weapon for truth. Injustices captured on video not only inspire support but also strengthen solidarity among communities. As Video for Change practitioners, it is our duty to support the voices of the marginalized and underprivileged, offer support by empowering them and providing them the tools and the capacity to tell their own stories. So if you want to know more about the Video for Change network, you can always visit our site, videoforchange.org, or follow us on Twitter, where we also share updates from our network members. Thank you very much. And back to you, Meghana.
Thank you so much, Demi, for that wonderful introduction and for sharing all the diverse stories and the vibrancy of the network. I'd like to call on my colleague Jessica from our hub in Brazil next to share a bit about how the Right to Record movement was seeded in Brazil. And since then, what changes have occurred on the ground? Jessica, please take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Meghana. Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica. I'm very honored to be here today to talk with you. I'm the communications coordinator for Brazil at Witness. And to talk about the right to record here in my country, it's to talk also about a complex right. Because according to our constitution and our rules, every Brazilian citizen or people residing here, they have the right to film and to photograph. They also can film the police, they can film the vehicles or other information that a police officer has, and it's if it is of public interest. And besides that, the police cannot turn off a camera if a person is recording. They cannot delete footage, and they cannot confiscate any equipment, only if a police officer has a judicial authorization. But the problem is that what we see in practice is not that. This right will depend on where you are, who you are, the color of your skin, your social class. And the work that we've been doing here at Witness Brazil is to support these people to film, especially people that don't have this right guaranteed. For example, we see lots of independent journalists, popular communicators suffering violence because they are filming the police, they are filming demonstrations, or they are in a place that they are not safe. So one of the examples that I bring here today comes from Coletivo Papo Reto. There is a collective that is based in Rio de Janeiro. They are in Favela Complexo do Alemão, and we've worked with them for years, supporting them on filming safely and on how to use these videos strategically. What this collective does, they work with human rights and also communication, and they do an amazing job in their community because they also train other people, and they work with this community so they can film when they can the police and other abuses, and then they share on a WhatsApp group where this collective is, and then the collective decides what they are going to do, if they are going to share to some authorities that they have contact with, if they are going to share to this footage to a human rights organization, or if they are going to share this in their communications platforms. And another good example of what we've been doing here is with indigenous communities. Many of these indigenous communities are far from big cities. They are near forests, and they are using the videos to defend their territories. Now these groups, they are called forest guardians, because they are the guardians of this community, this forest. So what they do is that they use their equipment, their technology equipments to monitor what is going on. So they can keep track on the deforestation, for example, using drones, and they can use their cameras to film extractivists, invaders, loggers, when they come to their communities. Many of these people, they are in danger, but their cameras and their cell phones also help to inhibit violent actions against their communities. For example, a few weeks ago, one of these groups in the north of the country, they filmed a group of security guards from a big company here in Brazil related to agribusiness, and they are trying to invade these indigenous communities, saying that they had the right to be there. And they were planning to shoot on these people, but since these people were recording, they were able to stop, at least for a while, what was going on. And then they shared this video with journalists and other organizations. So in Brazil, in order to support these communities, we've been working for a while on the right to record movement that we call here. So in 2019, we had our first gathering on the right to record movement, where we united more than 30 people from different groups in the country. And it was a great experience to share what is going on in different communities. So these groups could also exchange information, talk about how they are filming safely, and then they came back to their communities and they could share this to more people. So this is the work that we've been doing. And we need to do more, because we know that more people need to be aware of this right, and this right also needs to be guaranteed for more people. So we work with other human rights organizations, journalists, lawmakers, and activists, so this right can be more guaranteed and more respected in Brazil. Thanks, Megana.
Thank you, Jessica, for sharing all that. And even if the laws are in place, if they're not being respected or recognized by those who are responsible for implementing them, then human rights defenders definitely have their work cut out for them. King, perhaps you could share a little bit about the challenges on the ground in the Philippines, and of course, how your work at Engage Media comes into play.
Yeah, thanks, Megana. I hope through my anecdotes, our audience will get a picture of what's happening here in the Philippines. Yeah, first and foremost, I want to thank Witness for giving me the opportunity to share insights as a video activist and documentary filmmaker from the Philippines. I'm not in the position to give a real Asia perspective because of many limitations. A good chunk of what I'll share are anecdotes from my time before I joined Engage Media, a period spanning a little less than 2 decades of being part of video and alternative media collectives here in the Philippines, while collaborating with social movements of marginalized sectors. Around year 2000, an art school buddy and I were inspired by the floating plastic scene from the film American Beauty. We thought that given the accessibility of consumer video devices, we'd be able to express ourselves creatively, projecting what we see and have in mind and back and forth to the viewfinder and lens and recording it to tape. My buddy was more interested in established visual arts. I mean, back then, art for art's sake was still a thing. For my part, I was already at the center of student activism, being part of massive protests that toppled then Philippine President Joseph Estrada. Nonetheless, we each managed to own a mini DV camcorder around this time. We wanted to participate in the so-called digital video revolution that we often hear or read about. Interestingly, my JVC camera came from the States, sent to me by an aunt working as an undocumented cleaner in the state of Virginia. In 2001, September 11, attacks happened. After that, Presidents Bush and Macapagal Arroyo declared Philippines as the second front of this so-called war on terror. Pockets of mysterious bombings allegedly perpetrated by Al-Qaeda cells in Manila and Mindanao set the stage for stringent security in all establishments. It continues until today, actually. It suddenly became a bad idea to shoot floating plastics in the streets of Manila. While my friend, while filming the fine architecture of buildings in the Makati Business District, was arrested by the police. He was questioned repeatedly. The police couldn't comprehend the idea of documentaries shooting ordinary life, magic hour, brutalism in Philippine architecture known in Makati for a video that may or may not be finished. He was later released after his family intervened at the police station. For my part, I used the camcorder to document the rising cases of military abuse happening in rural areas. State forces always have trouble distinguishing rebels from farmers and indigenous peoples up in the mountains. So together with other student activists, we formed the video collective focusing on human rights and labor issues in the significant region outside Metro Manila. While filming my first documentary, I was abducted by the military and was interrogated. The details are for another time, but I was released by my captors. All wearing ski masks, they gave me another chance at life as long as I quit becoming an activist. Sadly, they took away my equipment, all my belongings actually. In both experiences, however different, my body and I didn't break a single law, but suffered in various ways only because we were filming and wanted to record what we saw. I'd spend the rest of 2000s being part of video collectives or alternative media collectives, as we call them here in the Philippines. To mitigate risks, and this continues until today, we registered as nonprofit media. Being registered allowed us to print and wear media IDs. But soon, our IDs needed to be bigger and bigger because we'd still be beaten up by police during demonstrations, despite the enormously big media badges. We soon realized that the police had harmed us intentionally because we were already red tagged. We were the ralliest media, according to them. So we made our ID smaller again, and our media outfits logos too small to be seen by the police. In the early 2010s, an informal network of primarily photographers started the Do Not Shoot Here network. It was a spontaneous reaction to an informal and unwritten policy barring anyone with a DSLR camera from shooting photos inside Rizal Park, our national park in the heart of Manila. Security forces at the park told by their bosses that wedding prenups or minor celebrities were using the park grounds for commercial work, so they barred anyone from shooting. Despite the seemingly narrow rationale of the Do Not Shoot Here network, we believe that it was a culmination of anger, irritation of videographers, photographers, journalists, and activists who were constantly barred by authorities to record images in public spaces or shooting public officials like police while they disperse rallies. Hundreds joined the series of art protests and demonstrations in the coming years. Soon after, this policy was lifted. This is a clear message that the Right to Record campaign isn't something that will be handed over by authorities on a silver plate. Rather, it's something that we need to fight for. I mean, these days, technology, accessibility, and how mobile devices are shaping norms and culture affect our right to record in public spaces and, shoot officials. Smartphone photography is at its pinnacle, I believe. It's hard to say if there's normalization these days when it comes to this matter, or if smaller devices really just make it easier for us to shoot discreetly. These days, when questioned, having a media badge is still a way out for us. It's still tricky and problematic for non-media activists or campaigners to maximize their gadgets during demonstrations or fact-finding missions in rural areas. I haven't tried saying that I'm an influencer or blogger, but that might actually be silly in case authorities demand that I show them my profile with too few followers to influence consumers. Anyway, I'll end here. I look forward to the outcome of this campaign. Rest assured that Filipino video activists will support it in ways we can. I hope opportunities from this campaign will allow engaged media to give a more regional perspective through research and collaborations with Indonesian, Malaysian, Thai, Myanmar, and other video activists in the region. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, King, for your very strong contribution, for bringing in your personal story. And we definitely look forward to continuing our partnership with Engage Media. Thank you. I'd like to call on my colleague Nkem from our Africa Hub to speak a little bit about how the right to record has played out in the region. Nkem.
Thank you. Thanks, Megana. Hello, everyone. I am Nkem Agoa, and I'm the Africa Program Manager at Witness. Let's talk about protest for a bit. As we have all established, when Witness speaks about the right to record, we primarily refer to the right to take out a camera or cell phone and film the military or law enforcement without fear of arrest, violence, or other retaliation. The right to record is closely linked to movements and protests in Africa. Protest is a tool of resistance and has come under attack even within democracies in the continent. Governments have demonized protests as subversive, unpatriotic, and violent. Protesters have been mischaracterized as thugs, troublemakers, and puppets of foreign influence in some cases. Make no mistakes, these are deliberate labels to diminish the power of protest and stifle dissent. However, activists, human rights defenders, journalists, people in general are increasingly whipping out their cameras to defend their rights to freedom of expression and protest. In Nigeria, the NSAS movement, which climaxed in 2020, was ignited by a video of officers of the Special Anti-Robbery Squad brutalizing a young man. For those who are unfamiliar with the NSAS movement, it was a movement against the brutality of the Special Anti-Robbery Squad of the Nigerian Police Force, also known as SARS. They were a notorious unit of the Nigerian police, known for harassment, torture, and extrajudicial executions, particularly of young people. The NSAS protest was sustained in many ways by the videos documented by protesters on the ground. Those videos told the story of the movement without the traditional gatekeepers who are either a part of the government or too scared of the government to speak up. We saw a similar pattern in the Fees Must Fall movement in South Africa and this flag movement in Zimbabwe. Protesters used video extensively as a tool to guard their spaces of autonomy. Yes, activists film in protest as a tool to own their narratives and push back against targeted disinformation. But they also do this to protect themselves from the brutality of security operatives. Ashraf Kassiye, a journalist who covered the Ugandan elections in 2021, told us that he kept the camera rolling because it was the only way to ensure his safety and that of other activists and journalists. He used live streaming to circumvent government censorship of the media. He believes these live streams would make the government conscious that the world was watching them. But despite his best efforts, he got hit by a gunshot by the Ugandan security officials, which almost cost him his life. Other activists and journalists covering the main opposition campaign trail, the Bobby Wine campaign, were not as lucky as some of them died from the brutal crackdown of the campaign. It is disheartening that even journalists who are a protected group are not spared from the brutality associated with exercising the right to record. Ashraf told us, "I thought I was safe. I am a journalist. I had my vest that said press, an ID card that identifies me as a journalist, similar to what King just shared, and that was not enough." If journalists' rights to record, their rights to carry out their duties without fear or interference, which is spelled out in most national constitutions, is not respected, what becomes of ordinary people? So this brutality is not just done to intimidate a single individual, but to send a clear message to others. We've also seen instances where a piece of video evidence could be poorly made, but was so powerful in shining the light on issues or securing the safety of the individuals in the video. We saw this in the Rodney King video of 1991. We also saw this in Nigeria, where two Nigerian ladies, Treasure Onduka and Felicia Okpara, who were arbitrarily arrested during the NSAS protest, were released from detention after a video that captured the arrest was distributed online. These ladies shared with us that they were tortured and threatened with armed robbery charges while in custody. They literally believe that they are alive today because of the people who filmed them while the police arrested them. This is a similar story to that of Mildred Owiso, a Kenyan activist who was arrested in her home without a warrant. Her ability to live stream before her phone was confiscated led to a public outcry calling for her release. So you see, the right to record defends the right to protest. It gives people a chance to own their narrative and preserve history. It ensures that the truth does not die in the dark and helps preserve critical evidence to bolster justice efforts. Remember, history is only favorable to those who tell it or those who can tell it. I'll end here. Thanks, Megana, for inviting me, and well done to you and the team on this very important campaign. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nkem, and thank you for sharing all those examples from across Africa. And I'm sure our next speaker, Laura, would share similar examples from protest movements across Latin America and how witnesses work in the region and the strategies interplay with the right to record. Laura, over to you.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Megana. I hear a lot of coincidence coming from Africa, coming from Asia, and what is coming from Brazil, of course, and what is happening in Latin America. So thank you for this effort. I think it makes a lot of sense to do a right to record campaign in a global wide view, so that we can push back to what is happening in our countries. I want to share just a few numbers on what is happening in Latin America, or what has happened in the last years. For example, in Venezuela, there were 3,308 extrajudicial execution committed by public forces during 2021. In Mexico, the murders committed by the police duplicate the catches that are made by this armed force in this country. In Puerto Rico, 46% of the murdered people by the police were unarmed. In Argentina, 70% of the injuries caused by less hard arms, weapons, are really high severe injuries to people that had required medical attention. In 2020, we heard about 537 dead associated to the acting of the police. 384 of them occur inside the detention centers. So this talks about the police brutality happening not only outside the prisons and the detention centers during manifestations and during protests in these countries, but also inside the detention centers. In Colombia, during the national strike in 2021, we heard, or there were registrations by NGOs, by organizations, by the social movement of one eye injury per day made by the police with these rubber bullets, or even hard metal bullets that were used by the police during this national strike in 2021 in Colombia. In Chile, 20% of the rubber bullets that were used during the demonstrations and the mobilization in 2019 were not actually of rubber, they were actually made of a harder metal, these bullets during the demonstrations. These are just some numbers that we can use to justify why it is important to keep on making on the right to record in these countries. And now I'm going to share some examples on how especially alternative community independent media have been using video in some of the Latin American countries to reverse the narrative, to put police or armed forces into justice. So for example, in Mexico in 2012, 2013, with the arriving to the president of the candidate that was impulsed by the major TV chain here in Mexico, lots of protests happened on this context on the streets, and of course a lot of police violence too. Thanks to the documentation of several activists of this repression, there was a visibility of what was happening, and even some police officers are still today taken into the justice system. We know in our countries justice always take a lot of time, so we are about to see if these police are going to be effectively taken into a serious condemnation for what they have done. But what we can say happened during this time in Mexico is that the narrative changed. The major TV chain, Televisa, was trying, as we heard now from Inkem happening in Africa, they tried to stigmatize the protesters, and thanks to this work of independent media, alternative media, there was a turning in a lot of the narrative, in a lot of the audiences, understanding what was really happening at the moment and how the main TV change was actually this informing population with what they were saying. So this is one example. Another example, 2016 in Mexico, in Oaxaca, in Nochistlán, in the context of the teachers' mobilization, also due to audiovisual registration made mainly by alternative outlets, alternative media, government had to admit that they use guns that are only permitted by use of the military during the management of this protest and demonstration. Killings were a result of this use of gun by the police, and these cases are today also under the investigation. But one thing that we can say that happened is that the government had publicly to admit that they really use those weapons, because at first they were saying they didn't use them just to cover what they were actually doing. So in another example, for example, in Chile, in mid-October 2019, there was a big a protest, a lot of manifestation, people on the streets protesting against the constitution that has put there by the dictatorship. People demanded dignity at the time, and the police, of course, answered with violence, a lot of violence. And again, thanks to the audiovisual documentation, for example, Amnesty International was able to determine that injuries and assaults, which constitute violation of the right to physical integrity, were widespread, not exceptional. This was a systematic use of violence by the police to control the manifestation and the protest in Chile. And Amnesty International also found that there was torture and ill treatment by the police during these acts. So this is another important example of how this video making change the narrative. And today we know these cases are also under the investigation of the justice system. And it's very hard for them to deny what happened because of this evidence that is in video. Colombia protest 2021, also known as a national strike, because it was a very, very big series of multifactorial demonstration triggered by the announcement of the tax reform that was proposed by the former president Iván Duque. The protests were initially with the objective of achieving the elimination of this restructuring proposal, but were accentuated mainly by the disproportionate use of force by members of the public force in Colombia. Again, thanks to the audiovisual documentation, many of these cases, murder by the police and other severe human rights violations, were taken into light, and now are also under the police investigation. You can see more information about this in 070, which is a webpage in Colombia. You can see a lot more information. I also want to take a very fast case that occurred in Argentina in 2001. I think this is an important case also. At this moment, Argentina experienced significantly institutionally political history movement. There was a very big, again, manifestation movement. About 30 people died during this mobilization, and other 4,500 more or less were arrested by this time. You can see more information about this in the Center of Legal Studies, CELS, in Argentina. You can find a lot of information, but thanks to this organization and other groups, they gathered together in one specific case, about 18 videos that for evidence of 3 murders of a crime. And in the end, these videos, after a long justice process system, as we know, there was a confirmation of a condemnation of a sentence to police that were the responsible of causing these deaths. And today they are under these sentences being in the justice. So just to mention that it is possible to even take police to justice and do some justice in our countries that we know is very hard. So, okay, I leave it to there. Megana, thank you. Thank you again.
Thanks so much, Lau, and for sharing all those examples and really for touching on the very important point that the right to record really helps protect the narrative that those of us on the ground want communicated, right? So thanks for sharing that very important point and for all those case studies. I would like to move now to Roy. Perhaps you could speak to the work of B'Tselem in bolstering the right to record. Thank you.
Hi, I'm thrilled to be here with all of you. B'Tselem is an Israeli human rights organization. We're calling ourselves the Center for the Information Center for Human Rights in the occupied territories. And we occupy the array of human rights violations perpetrated by the Israeli apartheid regime against Palestinians. Now, one of the main characteristics of an apartheid regime is the use of violence and oppression by the ruling group, in our context, Jewish Israelis, against and over Palestinians. And of course, in order to normalize and to secure the consent of people to perpetrate violence against another people, you need to provide them with impunity. And this is the case here. We are not a new organization. We've been working and documenting the situation for over 30 years. And the norm is that acts of violence against Palestinians, whether they're carried out by Israeli security forces, police, army, or even by by settlers, are not in people that are perpetrating it are not indicted. People are not tried. It's normalized. This is the norm. The rare cases in which things do happen are, of course, mainly when there's documentation, and video and footage are playing a major role in bringing some measure of justice for victims. Apart from that, the footage, the film, is a powerful tool for us to do advocacy. We don't believe that change is going to happen in our region, in Israel, Palestine, from within, because the situation is not democratic. So we can't rely on people acting out of moral outrage, because a lot of the people are not asked. They can't vote. They don't have political rights. So despite probably theoretically having a political majority of people living between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River that support freedom and equality, it will never translate itself to winning elections, because millions of people are simply not voting for the system that controls their lives. So international advocacy is the tool that we think might bring non-violent change to the situation. And of course, the footage and video is something that is major, is key in order to bring the attention of both media and local publics, and getting them to see what happens. For example, 2 weeks ago, the Israeli army demolished a school in South Hebron Hills, in an area that Israel wants to forcibly transfer 12 communities out of in order to give the land to Jewish settlers. The video footage of the children and the demolition carried out by the army garnered over 3 million views on our social media platforms. And that's not even counting the millions of others that saw it on just general media. And we're talking, the news agencies, the radio, newspapers, both local and international. Another example is many cases which we investigate of shooting of Palestinians by Israeli security forces. The general narrative that the army spokesperson is giving to journalists and to the public is that they did something and then they were shot. However, footage from CCTV or shot by people that were passing by often disproves the situation. Understanding the power of video and also the point of view brought B'Tselem to start over 15 years ago a video camera project in which we distribute cameras to Palestinians in various areas, whether in the West Bank, whether there's a problem there of settler violence, or maybe there's a lot of friction with the Israeli security forces, and they simply document their lives and show what happens on a daily basis. Those videos are really enables B'Tselem to bring a fresh new narrative and to describe to the world what really goes on under the Israeli apartheid regime. 2 weeks ago, an Israeli activist went to Hebron and was severely beaten up by a soldier. That was documented and it made it into the media here. A lot of our colleagues thought that this is like a good thing, but we immediately understood that this is going to create a backlash, especially with the Israeli far-right forming coalition that is now getting into power. And indeed, just yesterday, the news here is a discussion about legislating prohibition of filming soldiers in doing their jobs, including a jail sentence. Of course, this is just to show how afraid the regime here is from actually being seen by the world and by the local people. And we in B'Tselem, we are not going to let this deter us. Whether they legislate something like this or not, we will continue to document what happens under the Israeli occupation, despite the growing displeasure of the Israeli authorities from being documented. In that respect, I want to also note the killing of world-renowned Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh in May this year by Israeli army. She was clearly marked as a journalist with a vest, with a helmet, yet she was shot by an Israeli soldier. Initially, and this is also important in this context, the Israeli army released a video footage of a Palestinian militant shooting somewhere in the vicinity of the area. So we have to really take into account the fact that we're not the only ones that are out there. Citizen journalism is working against propaganda efforts in many cases. However, we were able to disprove that version of event, taking GPS location of the film distributed by our government and the area where Shireen Abu Akleh was killed, proving that there was no line of sight between those 2 points, and she couldn't have been shot by Palestinian militants shown in that video. So really, like, the video is a very powerful tool, but we have to also take in account the fact that footage can be manipulated, as it often done by the people that were trying to resist. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Roy, for sharing the really powerful work of B'Tselem and for touching on also the flip side of filming evidence, and to recognize also that video is a non-violent tool to use against those who are ruthless and violent, and to be able to kind of destabilize this, those who are in powerful positions. I think video is a radical tool, and we just have to be careful how we use it as well. Thanks for that. And I move to invite my colleague Jackie to share a little bit about Witness's work in the US and how the right to record has played out over there. Jackie.
Thank you so much, Megana. It's really great to be sharing this space with all of you and hearing these stories and experiences and how many similarities there are, both in the legislation and protection of that legislation or lack of it, and how that actually plays out. I wanted to talk a little bit about the laws here in the United States and how they are often not respected, because I think similar to what Jessica was saying in Brazil, in the United States, we do have the right to record. It falls under our constitutional First Amendment rights. And this essentially is saying that we do, regardless of your immigration status, have the right to film law enforcement in public spaces as long as you aren't interfering. And some states and cities have gone even further to enshrine this law. We know that California and Connecticut, Colorado, for example, have laws on the books that are affirming this right, and in some cases even give you the ability to sue the state or the city if that right is violated. More recently in 2020, following the George Floyd protest and the Black Lives Matter protest, the city of New York actually passed a law called the Right to Record Act that gives people the right to film, the right to sue the city and state court, and interestingly, it demands that the NYPD release additional data about interactions with people filming the police. So on one hand, it is really positive that we have these laws on the books that technically affirm our right to film the police. But as everybody here has said, we know that that does not always play out, and that those rights are not always respected. And we're seeing repeatedly, especially since 2020, states and different courts kind of trying to poke holes in this and challenging this right. For example, recently Arizona, the state of Arizona passed a law saying that you have to be at least 8 feet away from the police to film them, which, as you know, you can't get a lot of detail or even a lot of audio to understand what's going on. So I believe that technically this has been put on pause by a judge, but the future of it is up in the air, and it's chilling to see the effect that this might have and the precedent it might set for other states. Similarly, in the state of Oklahoma, and this is something I find really disturbing because it's not directly about the right to record, but it's about the right to share footage. After the protest in 2020, the state of Oklahoma passed a bill that says you cannot post, I think it's the name, birthday, address, phone number of a police officer, essentially trying to say you can't dox somebody. But within that, it also includes you can't post a photo, video, or realistic likeness of that person. And so we've seen similar laws pass in France and in Spain saying that you can't post footage of officers. And it's really scary to think, what if we hadn't seen that footage of George Floyd? What if we hadn't seen the footage of Eric Garner? Where would we be now? I mean, the idea of curbing the right to share and letting the right to record exist is really disturbing. And so it's something we feel needs to be included in the conversation around the right to record. And just looking more broadly, especially again, since 2020, since the Black Lives Matter protest around George Floyd, we've seen over 100 bills being proposed in different states across the country trying to curb the right to protest or right to assemble. This is also largely in connection with large infrastructure projects. So recognizing that there is a growing movement trying to protect the climate, trying to protect our land, and that people are going out and protesting pipelines and different development infrastructures, and they are being met with very heavy prison sentences, felony charges just for being there. We know this will also curb the right to record for the individuals who are attending the protest, as well as the journalists, as several other people have pointed out here. I think it was in 2020, there were over 230 incidents violating the freedom of the press of journalists and media documenting the protests. And this includes, journalists who lost an eye, who were arrested, who had their video equipment confiscated. So we're seeing these threats at every level. And of course, we also know that depending on who you are, the color of your skin, your perceived identity, your gender, your mental health status, whether or not you're housed, all of these make you a greater risk. And we're seeing these risks be elevated and more threats against people who are filming. And I think it's actually interesting, the law I mentioned previously in New York City that requires data to be released. A report, I think about 2 weeks ago, came out saying that in the past year, there's been a 14% increase in the number of people arrested while filming the police. There's been a 240% increase since last year in the number of criminal summonses given to people for filming, and a 611% increase in the number of people receiving civil summonses. And the data, of course, shows that it's overwhelmingly people of color who are being ticketed and arrested for doing this. And we don't need the data to tell us that this is what's happening. This is the lived experience, something that we know quite clearly. But it is the Black and brown communities in this country who are already over-policed, over-surveilled, targeted, harassed, that are bearing the brunt of this. I think one example that really sheds light on all of this is the case of Ramsey Orta, who is someone who we've had the opportunity to work with a little bit. And Ramsey is the person who filmed the video of Eric Garner, who was killed by the NYPD in 2014. And the footage of his death, he was put in a chokehold by Staten Island police. And his final words, "I can't breathe," which he repeated 11 times, became a rallying cry for global movements and has continued to really resonate within the Black Lives Matter movement. And Ramsey was a friend of Eric Garner's, and he filmed this video and went to the press and published it, and it immediately went viral. And he pretty immediately faced backlash for this. He became targeted by the police in both online and offline harassment campaigns. They were driving by his house saying, with their phones out the window saying, "You filmed us, we'll film you." He was arrested for unrelated charges several times and faced targeting and harassment by the corrections officers. And Ramsey has reflected in saying, he knows it's important this footage got out and exposed what happened, but he thinks he would maybe, if he were to do it again, he would share the footage anonymously so he didn't become such a target. And I share this story because I think it's heartbreaking, also because the family of George Floyd and did not receive any real justice in the judicial system or anywhere else, really. They're still fighting. But I think it underscores the importance and the work that Witness is doing in the United States and in all of our different regional programs to help people understand what are the risks, how to protect themselves, how to assess risks, and how to film in a way that is more likely to produce change. And this includes really making sure you know the rights of your local laws and how to assess your own personal risks and threat in the moment and where you are. And I think that, especially as Laura was mentioning, we know that video has the power to affect change. It has the power to shift narratives, to expose abuses, and to support these justice and accountability processes. And that's why we are trying to do campaigns like this, to share resources. And we're constantly learning from our partners, from their reflections, from their experiences. And that's informing us and helping make this guidance stronger, so that we can, as a movement, defend and protect the right to record, even if it's not necessarily something that we can rely on legally. So I'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Meghana.
Thank you, Jackie. Thanks for sharing all those valuable insights and emphasizing how much this work impacts vulnerable communities whose rights have been stripped on account of not being among the privileged. So this concludes the main segment of content for this huddle. I'd like to kick off our final 10 minutes with a question that I'd ask all of you, and any one of you, a few of you could respond to this. And that is, what are other important intersecting issue areas that you think have been or could be greatly enhanced by guaranteeing the right to record, and how so? Who'd like to take the floor? We have 10 minutes.
I can go quickly. The right to record intersects with all other human rights, really, because human rights are interconnected. But I would like to speak briefly about the right to record and its intersection with the rights to decent and meaningful housing, particularly in the context of forced evictions. Informal settlements across Africa are subjected to forced evictions, which are often violent and without prior notice. These communities are often referred to as the invisible population and are indeed the human cost of urban cities. And so to justify these attacks, they are labeled as hideouts for criminals, and perhaps they pose environmental threats to the city. And the government really just abdicating its responsibility to these people. But these communities are not staying silent. They're using video to tell their stories of resilience, courage, and creativity. They're using video to document evidence of police brutality and the scale of the demolitions in their communities. They're using their phone cameras, using drone technology and satellite imagery to document their communities. But even this comes under great threats to their personal safety. The use of drone technology, for example, is increasingly being restricted on the continent. In Nigeria, for example, now you need a permit to fly a drone at any range. And so you see that as technology evolves and promotes different ways in which people can film, the government are using different creative restrictions to curb that right. And it's just important for us to continue to innovate, continue to stay in touch with communities and help them to, and not just help them, like to work with them to be able to create ways in which we could continue to exercise this right in a way that works for us, but also ensures our safety and leads us closer to the justice goals of the community.
Thank you, Nkem, for that sharing. Anyone else?
Yes, I can go very briefly, just probably to mention that here in Mexico, we are seeing a very, and I think in a lot of parts of the world, a very increasing mobilization of people. It has been historically happening, migration from Latin America to US especially, and Mexico happens to be a bridge where a lot of people is passing, and also Mexico receiving a lot of pressure coming from US to control this migration and to repress this migration, especially by the national police here in Mexico. So we are hearing a lot of organizations coming back with documentation of what is the police repression against these groups of people in mobilization. So it's very important to increase. We also see a lot of repression, of course, and as a lot of you are mentioning, mechanisms, legal mechanisms also to restrain people, citizens, organizations to document these abuses. So an intersection that we can do is with migration, which has been also been a lot of work coming from the US, from Jackie and our colleagues there, because it is also an inter-country kind of efforts, us helping organizations documenting what is happening here and what is happening there is also important, because it's a continuum of mobilization on what is happening, of people that are mobilizing. So just very briefly to raise that issue too. Thank you, Megana.
Thank you, La.
Oh, I can also answer.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay,
Go ahead, Jessica.
very quickly, talking about our experience in Brazil. As Laura was saying, we see that there is an increase of the use of video we see people using video to try to defend human rights with more frequency. And in Brazil, this year, we had many cases of people filming to protect women's rights, and especially other women filming women who are suffering abuse. So from this perspective, we had a case that became very famous, that people filmed a woman who was in the hospital, who was unconscious, and a doctor raped her. And now this case is on court, but the people who filmed this, they don't know that if they are going to suffer something because they filmed there. So as what I was saying about the right to record, we also have to have more ethical issues discussed here, more rights guaranteed to victims and also to the people that are filming, that are exposing themselves, that they can do this with safety, and that they can be more informed on the rights that they have and on what they can do. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessica. I think, King, you wanted to talk.
Yes. Yeah, I think the people's right to record will also influence and greatly help the struggle for land rights and, of course, ancestral domain rights of indigenous peoples in the region. In many cases, the people themselves and their supporters have difficulty filming in far-flung areas, and with a bigger campaign and hopefully a clearer legislation that supports the right of people to record will help these community members, and we all know that it will also contribute positively to the environmental campaigns that we have in various parts of the Asia-Pacific region. That's all for me.
Thank you, King. Anybody else would like to share?
I can quickly touch on a little bit of the flip side of right to record, which is something that we're seeing in terms of like an increase in surveillance technologies. And we know that authorities are seeing this footage and recognizing the power it has. And so in many cases, their response is, well, we should be the ones to film this, not leave it in the hands of the people. And so, for example, after the police killing of Michael Brown Jr. in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, they enacted a law that equipped police here with body cameras, saying this will help hold them accountable. We'll have the truth. We can totally trust what the police are doing with their footage and how they store it and how they share it and how they release it. And as Roy said, you know, we know that it's being manipulated. We know that they're trying to control the narrative. And our perspective has really been that we need more people to have cameras and not more police to be filming. We're seeing this similarly to what Laura was saying on the border. You know, a lot of people in the United States were fighting Trump's wall. And so Joe Biden came in and said, well, we'll have a virtual wall or a digital wall, which really just means that it's being monitored with this dystopian surveillance system of drones, of cameras everywhere, watching everything that everybody does. And this is not just watching the people who are migrating, but it's watching everyone in the communities that are based along these borders. And so we feel as part of this right to record, we really want to embrace this idea of surveillance, which is kind of the concept, the flip side of surveillance, and watching back and holding our own power so that we can keep an eye on what's happening, that we can control the narratives, and that we are staying on top of understanding the surveillance technologies that are watching us. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. We have a minute. Anyone else? If not, we shall conclude. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for your participation and for your contributions. And definitely this conversation shall continue. And I hope that you'll join us across our social media platforms, where we will continue to share our resources in our campaign. And I hope that, you know, we'll continue in supporting each other on affirming the right to record. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for watching.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.